Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy daily stories about cheating, revenge, and relationship advice. The ballroom was suffocating. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, casting shimmering light over the sea of executives, their spouses, and a few too eager junior associates hoping to catch the attention of someone important. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and champagne, while laughter and idle conversation hummed like white noise beneath the smooth jazz that floated from the band in the corner. I adjusted my tie for the 10th time, feeling the uncomfortable pinch of the collar around my neck. This wasn't my scene, not anymore. But Samantha loved these events, the glamour, the attention, the social games. She thrived in these settings, while I felt like an imposter in a suit that was a little too stiff and shoes that pinched my toes. I scanned the crowd, looking for her familiar figure. She had disappeared into the throng of partygoers earlier, leaving me by the bar with a drink and a forced smile. My glass, now empty, felt like a prop more than anything. The more I thought about it, the less I wanted to be here. Then I spotted her, Samantha. She was standing near the French doors leading out to the terrace, illuminated by the soft glow of the outdoor lanterns. Her gold hair was pulled back in an elegant twist, and her red dress clung to her in a way that made her stand out even in a crowd like this. For a moment, I felt a pang of pride. That's my wife. But that pride turned to something darker when I realized she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than my car. His dark hair was slicked back, and his hand rested casually on the small of her back, a gesture too intimate to be friendly. They were laughing, leaning in close to one another, and it wasn't the kind of conversation one had with a business acquaintance. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My feet carried me toward them before my mind had fully registered what I was doing. "Samantha," I called, my voice tight as I approached. She turned, her smile faltering just for a second before she regained her composure. "John," she said, as if surprised to see me, though I could tell she had anticipated this moment. The man beside her, Daniel, I would later learn, looked me over, his expression unreadable but somehow smug. He didn't step back, didn't move his hand from her back. I could feel the blood rushing to my head, the room narrowing around the three of us. "Who's this?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Samantha glanced at Daniel briefly, then back at me. Her voice was steady, almost too calm. "John, this is Daniel," she said, her eyes flicking between us. "We've been seeing each other." For a second, everything froze. My mind scrambled to process the words. "Seeing each other?" I repeated, as if by saying it aloud I could make sense of it. Daniel spoke up, his tone polite but without an ounce of apology. "I'm sorry it had to come out this way, John." His voice was smooth, practiced, like he was used to these kinds of confrontations. But Samantha and I didn't want to keep this hidden anymore. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel my hands start to tremble. I looked at Samantha, waiting for her to deny it, to say something that would make this whole thing less real. But instead, she took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "John," she began, "I was going to tell you tonight. Daniel and we're moving on. I'm leaving." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Leaving. My ears started ringing, and the laughter and music around us faded into a distant buzz. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Leaving?" I croaked, barely able to get the word out. "You can't just leave. After everything we've built." Her expression softened for a moment, almost as if she felt a pang of regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "We've grown apart, John. You know that. We've been living in separate worlds for years. I found someone who understands me." I stared at her, searching for something, anything to hold on to. "And Daniel," I said, turning to the man now standing confidently beside her, "he's that someone." Daniel didn't flinch. "I care about Samantha," he said simply. "I'm not here to make things harder for you, John. But this is happening." My mind was spinning, 1,000 thoughts crashing into one another. Anger, disbelief, confusion, they all fought for dominance. But all I could manage was a bitter laugh. And what about our life? Our marriage? You're just going to throw it all away for this guy? Samantha's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe? Pity? It's not that simple. I've been unhappy for a long time, John. You know that. Unhappy. I thought back to the years we had spent together, the home we had built, the dreams we once shared. How long had she been planning this? Samantha, I began, but she cut me off. Emily will help you, she said, her tone almost businesslike now. She'll be there for you while I'm away, Emily. I hadn't expected her to be involved in this. Samantha's best friend had always been close to her, but I never thought she would be part of something like this. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Emily's in on this? I asked, my voice rising. She's known this whole time, Samantha sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She'll be there to help you adjust. I didn't want to just leave you with nothing. I felt my chest tighten. You're leaving me with nothing already, Samantha. There was a long pause, the silence between us louder than the party going on around us. Then, without another word, Samantha reached for Daniel's hand, their fingers intertwining as she led him toward the exit. I stood there, watching as they disappeared into the crowd, the weight of her betrayal settling heavily on my shoulders. This wasn't just the end of a night, it was the end of everything. The drive home was a blur. The city lights streaked past my windows. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Samantha's revelation still felt like a cruel joke, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But the cold reality of it all was sinking in, and it was heavier than I had imagined. I stumbled through the front door, the silence of our home suddenly oppressive. Everything felt too quiet. The house was exactly as we had left it this morning, the neatly arranged furniture, the family photos on the walls, the scent of the pot roast Samantha had been preparing for dinner. Now, it all felt like a facade, a life I was no longer a part of. I went straight to my study and pulled out the file from the drawer. It had been sitting there, a tangible reminder of the suspicion I had been trying to ignore. The private investigator I had hired weeks ago had done more than just confirm my fears, he had collected damning evidence. I set the file on the desk and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside were photographs of Samantha and Daniel, taken in various locations, restaurants, parks, even a weekend getaway at a cabin. There were phone records showing frequent, late-night calls, and bank statements indicating unusual withdrawals and spending. The evidence was comprehensive, and it all pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan. Just as I was lost in the morass of documents, my phone buzzed. It was Dan, my lawyer. "John, are you at home?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, my voice flat. "I need to talk. I'm on my way over. I've been going through the files you sent me, and we need to discuss your next steps." "All right," I said, hanging up. I took a deep breath, trying to steel myself for the confrontation ahead. This was not how I wanted to spend my evening, but it was necessary. When Dan arrived, he carried a sense of calm authority with him. His suit was impeccably tailored, his demeanor confident. He set his briefcase on the desk and began to review the documents. "Let's start with what you have," Dan said, flipping through the file. "You've done well gathering evidence. This will be critical. I just want to make sure she doesn't get away with this," I said, my voice tinged with bitterness. "She's been planning this for months, maybe even longer. I need to make sure she pays for what she's done." Dan nodded, his expression serious. "The evidence you've collected is solid. It shows intent and premeditation. Samantha might have thought she could just walk away without consequence, but that's not going to happen. We'll use this to ensure you get a fair settlement." "There's one more thing," I said, hesitating. "Emily. Samantha's friend. I've heard she's been involved in this somehow." Dan raised an eyebrow. "Emily? I'll need to hear more about that. I recounted the brief exchange I'd had with Samantha at the party. Samantha said Emily would help me adjust while she's gone. I don't trust her. Dan frowned. Emily's testimony could be a double-edged sword. If she's been involved in this, she might be able to provide insights that could either help or hinder your case. We'll need to approach her carefully. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. It was Mia, Samantha's younger sister. I hesitated before answering, unsure of her stance in all this. John, Mia said, her voice urgent, I need to talk to you. I've heard about what's happening with Samantha. I don't want to see you go through this alone. I was taken aback. Mia, I didn't expect to hear from you. What do you know about this? I've seen Samantha and Daniel together, Mia said quietly. I didn't want to get involved at first, but I've been thinking. I know you're hurting, and I want to help. I know things about Samantha that might be useful. Dan glanced at me, signaling that this could be a significant development. Invite her over. The more information we have, the better. I agreed, and Mia arrived shortly afterward. She looked nervous but determined. We all gathered in the study, the mood somber but charged with purpose. Mia, Dan began, anything you can provide could make a difference. Tell us what you know. Mia took a deep breath. I've seen how Samantha has been changing over the past few months. She was different, more distant, more secretive. I even saw her with Daniel at a few places. I didn't know what to do at the time. I didn't want to believe it. Did you notice anything unusual? Anything that could support our case? Dan asked. Mia nodded. Yes. Samantha was always careful about her phone and her schedule. And she had been withdrawing cash, which I thought was odd. I don't know if it's relevant, but it seemed like she was hiding something. Excellent, Dan said, his tone approving. This will help us paint a clearer picture of her actions and intentions. As the night wore on, Dan and Mia shared their insights, and we began to piece together a plan. The evidence, combined with Mia's testimony and Emily's potential cooperation, would form the foundation of our case. When Mia left, Dan and I were left to process the day's revelations. You've got strong support, Dan said, closing his briefcase. With Mia's insights and the evidence, we'll be in a good position. But remember, this is just the beginning. The legal battle will be tough. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. Thank you, Dan. I just want to make sure that when this is all over, I can move on and rebuild. Dan gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. We'll get through this. One step at a time. As I watched him leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. But for now, I had a plan and the support of those who were willing to stand by me. And that was a start. The rain was relentless, tapping against the window of Dan's office as I sat across from him, nursing a stale cup of coffee. His office was a stark contrast to the chaotic mess that had become my life. The polished mahogany desk, the wall of legal books, and the carefully framed certificates on the wall were a testament to his professionalism. Everything about the room felt stable, controlled, a sharp contrast to the turmoil swirling inside me. Dan sat behind his desk, leaning back in his chair as he scanned the file I had given him. The soft shuffle of papers was the only sound apart from the rain. So, he finally said, his voice steady and matter-of-fact, we've got quite a bit to work with here. I looked at him, waiting for something more definitive. And? What's next? Dan closed the file and rested his hands on it. He looked up at me, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. First of all, you've done the right thing by coming to me early and gathering this evidence. A lot of people don't think to do that until it's too late. The private investigator's work is solid, there's no way Samantha can deny the affair, and that's going to be key in divorce negotiations. But there's more to it than just catching her in the act. Like what? I asked, leaning forward in my chair. My voice was harsher than I intended. What more could there be? She's been cheating, planning this behind my back for months. I want her to pay for what she's done. Dan raised a hand, a signal for me to rein in my emotions. I get it, John. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But divorce law isn't about punishing someone. It's about making sure you get what's fair. The more evidence we have, the better our negotiating position. And right now, we've got enough to make sure Samantha's departure is far more complicated than she expected. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the exhaustion settling in. I don't want to just let her walk away with half of everything I've worked for. She's planning to run off with Daniel, and she thinks she can do it without a second thought. Dan sighed, leaning forward and clasping his hands together. She won't get away with it that easily. But we need to play this smart. Emotion won't win this case for you. Strategy will. First, we need to document everything. From now on, every conversation you have with Samantha, every interaction, write it down. Dates, times, context. If there's any communication over text or email, save it. All of this will be crucial when we start negotiating. I nodded, though my mind was still spinning. What about Emily? I asked, my voice quieter. Samantha said she'd help me adjust, but I don't trust her. She's always been too close to Samantha. Dan's lips curled into a thin smile. Emily's involvement could either work in our favor or be a problem. If she's helping Samantha in any way, we'll need to keep an eye on her. But if we can get her to testify, maybe she knows things Samantha doesn't want coming out, it could shift the balance. My advice is to keep her close. Don't let her know that you're suspicious of her. I raised an eyebrow. You really think she'd betray Samantha like that? Everyone's got a breaking point, Dan replied with a shrug. If Emily sees that Samantha's going to drag her down with her, she might flip. It's worth a shot. But for now, play nice. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of everything pressing down on me. And what about Mia? She's already reached out, offering to help. She knows about Daniel and Samantha. Dan considered that for a moment. Mia could be a valuable witness. Siblings often know more than we think. If she's willing to testify or provide information, that's another point in our favor. I'd say keep the lines of communication open with her. Her testimony could be the final nail in the coffin if we get to court. I stared out the window, watching the rain stream down the glass in endless rivulets. Everything felt so out of control, like my life was slipping through my fingers and I couldn't stop it. I turned back to Dan, my voice quieter now. How do people get through this, Dan? How do they survive something like this? Dan leaned back in his chair, his expression softening for the first time. It's not easy, John. Divorce is ugly. It can tear people apart emotionally, financially, even physically. But you'll get through it, piece by piece. You have to be smart, be patient, and trust that, in the end, you'll come out stronger. It's not about winning or losing, it's about protecting yourself and moving forward. I nodded, feeling the exhaustion deep in my bones. And how do I deal with her? Dan raised an eyebrow. Samantha. Yeah, I said, the bitterness creeping into my voice. Every time I see her, I can't believe she's done this. How do I handle that? Dan sighed, tapping his fingers on the desk. It's hard to stay civil when someone you trusted betrays you like that. But you have to. The last thing you want is for her to use your anger against you in court. Keep your emotions in check when you deal with her. Be calm, be polite. If she pushes your buttons, walk away. She's expecting you to lose it. Don't give her that satisfaction. I stared at the floor, nodding slowly. Right. Stay calm. Document everything. Play it smart. Dan stood up and walked around his desk, placing a hand on my shoulder. You've got this, John. It's going to be a long fight, but you're not alone in this. We'll make sure Samantha doesn't get more than she deserves. And when this is over, you'll be in a better place. I stood up as well, shaking his hand. Thanks, Dan. I don't know what I'd do without you right now. That's what I'm here for, Dan said with a small smile. Just remember, this is a process. One step at a time. And don't hesitate to call me if anything changes. As I left his office, the rain had eased to a drizzle, the gray sky still hanging low over the city. I pulled my collar up against the chill and headed to my car, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. Dan was right. This wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a plan, a way to fight back, to regain some control over my life. And I wasn't going to let Samantha take that away from me without a battle. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh, sterile glow on the polished wood and muted tones of the furniture. It wasn't like the dramatic scenes you see in movies. No gavel bangs or fiery objections, just a quiet, simmering tension as both sides prepared for battle. It was strange to think that the end of my marriage, the life Samantha and I had built together, was going to be decided in a place like this. I sat beside Dan, my lawyer, at the long, polished table. Across from us sat Samantha and her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with a permanent smirk, the kind that made my stomach twist. Samantha looked composed, as if she had prepared for this moment. She wore a black suit, understated but elegant. Daniel wasn't by her side today, he had the good sense to stay away from the legal proceedings. It was just the two of us now, facing off like strangers divided by a table and years of betrayal. Dan leaned over to me, whispering, "Stay calm. The judge is impartial, but we don't want to give them any reason to sympathize with her." I nodded, trying to ignore the tightening knot in my chest. Stay calm. That's what Dan kept telling me. But it was hard to stay calm when my entire life felt like it was crumbling around me. The judge, an older woman with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the room to order. Let's begin with opening statements. Samantha's lawyer stood first, her voice smooth and authoritative. Your Honor, we are here today to resolve the unfortunate dissolution of a marriage that has clearly run its course. My client, Samantha Mitchell, has done everything in her power to handle this matter with dignity and respect, but it's become clear that reconciliation is not possible. She is seeking a fair and equitable division of assets, and we believe that the evidence will show she is entitled to what she has requested. I gritted my teeth. Dignity and respect. I muttered under my breath. Dan shot me a warning glance. When it was our turn, Dan stood up, straightening his jacket. Your Honor, while it is true that the marriage between Mr. John Mitchell and Mrs. Samantha Mitchell has come to an end, the circumstances under which it has ended are anything but respectful. The evidence we will present today will show that Mrs. Mitchell not only violated the trust of her husband, but she also engaged in an affair that she concealed while planning to leave the marriage with a significant portion of the assets. We are here to ensure that Mr. Mitchell receives a fair outcome, based on the full scope of what has transpired. The judge nodded, her expression unreadable, and motioned for the first witness to be called. Emily, Samantha's closest friend, was the first to take the stand. She looked nervous as she walked up, her eyes flicking between me and Samantha, but she composed herself once she sat down. Dan approached the witness stand, his voice calm and measured. Emily, can you tell us how long you've known Samantha Mitchell? We've been friends for over 10 years, she replied, her voice shaky. And in that time, you've spent a significant amount of time with both Samantha and her husband, John, correct? Yes, that's right. Dan nodded, taking a moment before his next question. Emily, have you ever been aware of Samantha's relationship with Daniel, the man she's currently involved with? Emily hesitated, glancing quickly at Samantha before answering. Yes, I've known about it. There was a slight murmur in the courtroom, but the judge quickly silenced it with a glance. Dan pressed on. And when did you become aware of this relationship? Emily swallowed hard. A few months ago. Samantha confided in me. Did you ever advise her to tell John about the affair? Emily shifted in her seat. I suggested she be honest with him, but she said she needed more time. That she wasn't ready. Dan's tone remained even. So, you were aware that Samantha was keeping this relationship a secret from her husband? Yes, Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Dan gave a small, satisfied nod. Thank you, Emily. No further questions. As Emily stepped down, Samantha's lawyer looked unfazed. She had anticipated this, no doubt. But the testimony had done what it needed to, establish that Samantha had been dishonest, not just with me, but with everyone involved. Next, Mia was called to the stand. Samantha's younger sister looked more confident than Emily had, her jaw set with determination. I had never expected her to take my side, but after our recent conversations, she had become a surprising ally. Dan approached her with the same calm professionalism. Mia, thank you for being here today. How long have you known about Samantha's relationship with Daniel? Mia didn't hesitate. I found out a few months ago. I confronted her about it, and what was her response? Mia took a breath, her gaze steady. She admitted to the affair. She said she was planning to leave John and that Daniel had already helped her make financial plans. She wasn't just leaving him emotionally, she was preparing to take a significant portion of their assets with her. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. I could see Samantha stiffen slightly in her seat, her calm mask slipping for just a moment. Dan seized the opportunity. So, Samantha was not only planning to leave John, but she was actively preparing to secure as much of their financial resources as possible. Mia nodded. Yes. She wanted to make sure she was taken care of after the divorce. Dan smiled slightly, a victory gleaming in his eyes. No further questions. Samantha's lawyer rose, trying to regain control of the narrative. Mia, you and your sister have had a complicated relationship over the years, haven't you? Mia tilted her head slightly. Like any siblings, we've had our ups and downs. But I'm here to tell the truth. Samantha's lawyer gave a tight smile. Of course. No further questions. As Mia stepped down, Dan leaned over to me, whispering, that was good. Really good. The judge is listening. The final moments of the trial played out with less drama but more weight. The financial records, the testimony from the investigator, and Mia's account painted a clear picture of betrayal, not just personal but calculated and strategic. The judge took a few moments to review her notes before finally looking up at both sides. This is never an easy decision, particularly when emotions are running high, but the evidence presented today has made it clear that Mrs. Mitchell was not forthright in her dealings with Mr. Mitchell. The court finds that Mr. Mitchell is entitled to a significant portion of the marital assets, given the evidence of misconduct. I exhaled, not even realizing I had been holding my breath. I glanced at Samantha. Her expression was unreadable, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She knew this wasn't the outcome she had been hoping for. As the judge continued with the final orders, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't joy, not exactly. There was no joy in ending a marriage this way, but there was a sense of justice. Samantha wasn't walking away unscathed. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. After the session ended, as people began to file out of the courtroom, I gathered my things, ready to leave this chapter of my life behind. But before I could go, I heard a voice behind me. John. I turned to see Daniel standing near the doorway, his face strained. He looked like a man who had lost more than he had gained. I just wanted to say. I'm sorry, he said, his voice low, almost defeated. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Samantha, she's not the person I thought she was. I stared at him for a moment, unsure how to respond. Then I simply nodded. It's over now, and with that, I walked away, leaving them both behind. The battle in court had been fought, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was walking towards something new, something better.